Hey everyone, happy Friday and welcome to episode 204 of Fight Chat Friday from TKD Coach Academy. Today myself and Richie are going to start what might be one of a couple of episodes and looking at the idea of how to effectively train for ITF Sparring, and it's really kind of relevant at the moment because we're back into September. We've all these new people who've just bought their first set of sparring gear who are stepping onto the mats for the first time to spar. We've got a competition in 2 months' time that we need to have everybody ready for, our national championships here in Ireland. And of course, we've got our experienced competitors who are coming back, who are looking for the next level push, what's going to take them from where they were last year to maybe a new level now. So we're starting to think again in terms of what do we do, what's important, why do we do things the way that we do, and we just thought we'd kind of share the process with everybody else. So Richie, how would you kind of define what it is that our philosophy on sparring is?
Our philosophy on sparring, I suppose, is very simply having the ability to make good decisions and solve problems with the overarching theme of being able to hit and not get hit. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. I think that objective is super important to be able to frame everything you do. It was interesting. We had a kickboxer in last night with us in our advanced class who was competing at their international championships recently in Budapest and medaled and whatever. And we did a lot of constraints work last night. And she was very confused at the start. It's just not how she trains.
Sure.
And that's very much the case for most people. And I think when we do this type of training with other people as well, at the start, it's confusing for them. And they're like, what's going on? Like, why is this so difficult? Let's just like drill some combinations. So what we do is a little bit different. I think that's the first maybe objective that we have, is that ideally we want to frame this from the point of view of we want this sparring training to look like sparring.
Yeah, as much as possible, we want to keep the game.
Yeah, and I think the more often we can be in that position, the better. And this, like, it's really, for me, it's come from my own experience of doing it the opposite way for so long and not seeing the transfer when I went into sparring rounds, whether it be like at national squads or even competitions, and I might be working on a certain technique or certain whatever it may be drill, and it just doesn't transpire. But then when I started to research a little bit more, when I got a little bit more heavily into coaching, then I started to realize the reason why. And I think that the whole idea of the ecological dynamics, constraint-led approach, all these things, it's the terms that kind of throw people off. I think like most people do these things anyway, and they put up, they call them drills as well or whatever, and they just have certain tasks they want people to achieve, and it's not what they think the overarching idea of constraints and all this stuff is. Just like, okay, that's a very complicated stuff and we'll just do it our way. But a lot of people do this type of stuff anyway.
At least they do some of it some of the time. I think that's like, even if I go back, and this is a wee while ago, if I go back 35 36 years ago when I started and we put sparring gear on, we did some constraints. Like we did 90%, we did 50 or 60% hitting pads, doing things like that, and that was pretty advanced for that time because pads were a new thing. That's how old I am. But then we did about 40% sparring, make up the lines, bicycle chain around, rotate, here's a new partner, go again. But every now and again there was a bit of a constraint. You're attacking only, you're defending, your hands only, your legs only, you can only use side kick in this, you can only use this and this. I don't think we ever understood why. I don't think that was, I think it was always just a case of, well, you're not using your hands, so you get to only use your hands. There was an element of that. Or you're being smothered with hands, so now you only get to use your legs until you figure them out. So we did have some of that. And at its essence, that's probably where all of this starts. It's like, okay, how do we figure out how to solve an in-game problem by removing some of the complexity of the game so we can focus more deeply on solving the problem at hand? So we're removing some of the noise, some of the interference, the contextual interference, so we can focus on just the right signals, the right affordances. We're creating those affordances, and so we can start to couple an action and a reaction, or whatever it happens to be. And then what we've done is really, over the last number of years, as we got deeper and deeper into this, you're flipping things around and you're putting the coaching focus not on telling people how to do the thing as you planned it, but more focusing on how to design the environment, the scenario, the constraint, so that the situation presents themselves for the athlete to solve.
Which brings us back to what we're talking about today. If you don't understand the overview of the whole game we're trying to play and understand the high level of how you be successful, it's very, very, very difficult to reverse engineer backwards to be able to come up with this way of training to get tasks, objectives, drills, games, whatever term you want to use, to be able to get people to experience what they need to experience to be successful.
Sure.
So I think that's a big point, that you have to be able to understand what we're trying to achieve as a whole and where we want people to get to.
So we bring it back to what's the goal of the game and what are our invariants, what never changes.
Yeah. So what are the things in the game that we play that are always present, always constant? I think that's maybe a good place to start. So what are some of the ones that you are thinking of right off the bat?
Well, even just the first thing, and I know we mentioned already this episode, but in terms of the goal of the game, it's simply, so simply you can explain it to anybody who's ever played tag. It's the hit and don't get hit. Specifically, it's hitting the torso, the sides of the torso, and the front and sides of the head. So what that does straight away is it starts to shape our game a little bit. There's less advantage of getting to a back position or getting around your opponent. We're looking to put our strikes to the front area. So that what that does straight away is it limits. Some of our techniques don't work depending on what leg is in front. So we bring in some of that. So in terms of the things that never change, so those things, they do change. Things that never change in the game of sparring is timing and distance as being important variables. So if you want to catch or hit somebody else, you need to initiate your attack from a distance where that's possible, and you need to do it at a time where they're less capable of responding or defending. So timing, distance. The same on defense. If you want to defend against someone that's attacking you or counterattack, you need to be able to maintain a distance so that you can finish executing your technique, and you need to time the attack so that they are anticipated. They're responding to something that you've done, and that way you're able to pull off your counterattack. So that would be maybe one set of invariants for me. What about you?
One that springs to mind right away is, it's something that we don't always do in training, but it's very much relevant to the game of sparring in terms of a competition, is we need to be able to understand space and be able to control the ring within that space, because we do compete in a designated area, and that's not often how we train. So I think, first of all, we have to be able to distinguish what we're talking about here is developing the skills for people to ideally be able to play this sport in a competitive sense, because a lot of the time sparring in taekwondo can be very different in a training sense to a competition. So we're really talking about the sport side here right now in ITF, and when that is what we're talking about, the ring space and the spacing are very, very important invariants, because we usually have the same space all the time that we need to stay inside, and that's something that you have to be able to have a sense of. And a lot of time when you don't have that sense, you might step out and realize, oh, there's an area there that I can't step over the line of, and that's very, very important. So that's one invariant that we often don't consider.
Yeah, and then I suppose you jump into some things that are really principles that always apply. So in terms of things like looking at what you can control, within the ring. So that these are kind of principles. They're not invariants, but they are principles that you can apply that always hold true. So we can look at some of those kind of things, but really what it does for us, or having some idea of what the ultimate goal of the game is and what some of those invariants are, is it lets us start to design tasks. So we can sometimes call them constraints, and by that we mean limiting rules or limiting environments that change the shape or the goal of the task. They could be called scenarios, which works for us an awful lot of the time as well. And just to not confuse them, we don't call them drills. Even though you could, there's nothing wrong with that. But because in our head, drill is something where the problem and the solution are given to people to practice. That's it.
that actually brings up a good one, because I read an article this morning from Josh Peacock, who was speaking about Bruce Lee and the whole concept of aliveness and things like that. And I actually wrote down one of his ones here that he said the idea of the whole aliveness and having something live is unscripted and uncooperative interaction. So I think that was a great definition, because if you define it that way, a lot of the things where you think are very much going to help your athlete or your students, whatever way you want to call it, if it's cooperative and they're kind of letting you do it and it's scripted, then you're not really getting the best return that you want to, because it's a little bit of a fake environment. And I think that brings up the whole idea as well of decoupling. And maybe that's worth just explaining to people as well who don't understand.
Sure. So, and the first thing to say is Josh Peacock. Peacock, if the name doesn't ring a bell for you, Combat Learning Podcast, have a look at that or have a listen to that. And you'll also find Josh on Substack. So Substack Reads, have a look there. You'll find a lot of the articles that he's put up. There's a lot of people that we can kind of point you in the direction of who have very good material on this. But I mean, if you're just starting and your interest is martial arts exclusively, Josh is a good place to go. And we could probably throw in a link to a few of our previous episodes as well, where we've talked through some of these things before. But going to that idea of coupling or decoupling, if you take something to practice and it removes it from the game-like conditions, so usually what that means is you have no one resisting or opposing you. Okay, so once there's no opposition, or the opposition becomes something that's unrealistic to the game, the scenario, that situation doesn't emerge in the actual game, it becomes something that's contrived. It's no longer, it doesn't have that aliveness anymore. It becomes something that is much more scripted, much more dead in terms of its practice. So what we're trying to do is give people real affordances, which is opportunities for action, that they're going to see and experience in the real game, even as we simplify the game and remove some of the complexity to enable better practice. So what that would mean is, let's say we can create problems for ourselves. Like, we can create a scenario that, it lets you practice something. So let's say you want someone to improve their back kick. So you have somebody run at them with the two gloves crossed across their belly. So what we've done is we've decoupled in some ways, because although the person might be rushing forward as if they're going to blitz, and don't get me wrong, we do this sometimes. We want to get the shape of the back kick sometimes, and it's not the most intuitive movement. But what happens is nobody ever brings their hands onto their belly to run at you. That's never something that you're going to see or experience in the ring. They're normally going to be trying to punch you in the head. So when you take away all of the cues that a person would give when they're trying to punch you in the head, we're not developing a realistic sense of timing, distance, and the overall look of the technique is never there. And the other thing that often happens is when we make someone only attack or only defend, a very, very common thing that we will use from time to time, when you take away threat, people behave differently. So if I'm sparring with Richie, but I know Richie can't attack me, that he only has the defensive shot available, my behavior changes. I'll start to step into his space and go from closer distances. I'll start to do things with my hands down, or I'll start to change my guard, or I'll preempt my movements with things that would normally get me hit. And those create training scars. It's a great phrase I heard as well recently. It's a nice phrase, where basically you'll do what you did in training. You'll go into the ring and you'll do the thing you did in training because it was safe to go up against the person who had no attacking techniques available to them. You might just try to, do the same thing that was successful in training. So coupling is when we try to have the scenario and the actions as a small subset. If you imagine that Venn diagram, we're just looking to create a subset of what really happens in the match. We'll take out a lot of the other possibilities, but the actions that you're looking at should occur in the ring. They should look the same way as if you were just watching a 3-second clip out of a sparring match. It should look the same. If it looks completely contrived, different, then there has to be a different purpose for that. It's not that you can't do it, but you just have to have in your mind that we're not actually practicing to put the skill into the game. We're doing something else. And that might be okay, let's say, for conditioning purposes, or it might be okay for just working on balance and recovery, or working some capacity building, towards a kicking technique or something. But it doesn't really help you integrate that skill into the game.
Yeah, what you're trying to do is ensure that the task maintains the integrity of the full game
Yeah.
of sparring, basically.
Yeah.
So it needs to have that for us to be able to get the real learning. And the learning comes from you being in experiences. Like when you ride a bike, it's like, how do you learn how to ride a bike? It's because you have to experience your balance being tilted in different ways, and then, oh, I kind of got it now, and then you might fall, but then you get better and better, and it's through the experience of the process is how you learn, and it's how we learn as people, and that's the fastest way to do it, because a
Yeah.
lot of time you don't get that when the other side is not cooperative in ITF, for example, or any combat sport, because
I
we're not
like
really
I like
getting.
that analogy, Richie. And I'm going to just pluck something or throw something in there because it does explain the previous thing. Like, nobody ever learned to ride a bike by having stabilizers.
Yeah.
So what the stabilizers are is the decoupled environment. So you have been removed from the need to balance right and left and to adapt to the movement of the bike by having these extra two wheels there that aren't going to be there when the real thing comes. So ideally, our environment is maybe the couple of fingers under the saddle to, help the person kind of get the initial bit of speed, and then, you go on an environment where falling off doesn't hurt you or kill you. You go in a straight line. Okay, those are the things that you might do in terms of constraints that allow you to experience cycling in a coupled way, so that you're reacting to the environment, rather than putting, stabilizers in place that keep you upright no matter what you do, and all you learn to do is put one foot in front of the other and pedal. That's it. So sorry if I robbed your train of thought, but I just liked your analogy.
Yeah, like that's what it's about. It's like, then if we do have that example, it's like, how do we be able to get ourselves to that bigger picture? So the way you do it is making sure that you're not like taking away any solutions that could come up. And one thing that is kind of developing from this whole idea is that without you telling somebody that this is a solution, if it is a true, authentic solution to a problem or to a task, it should develop itself. And like an example that I kind of messing around with some constraints this week with my classes, and one of them was just a very simple. I call it, like, I have a list of constraints I'm trying to work on at the moment, where I might have two or three which are like the main tasks that I see of sparring that I want us to really train at and get better at, and we're going to bring them up week after week after week, with the idea of the tournaments and selection tournaments, etc., that you mentioned at the start of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to be our main training, essentially, but I also throw in like experiment ones just to kind of see how people are, and creativity and stuff like that, and just be playful, have some variety, etc. And one of the ones that I just messed around with this week to see how it would work is the task was, it's free sparring, but all I want you to do is, when you use your foot, you can only use the base of the foot to score. So that then produced people using sidekick at the beginning, and it was
Yeah.
just sidekick, sidekick, sidekick. And then a few people realized, okay, I could try maybe a hook kick. And then a few people realized, okay, I could try like a hacks or an axe. And then all of a sudden it started to develop into people were throwing back kicks from the opposite side to come around and use the base of the foot in the opposite direction. But the whole idea here is that if something is an authentic solution, it should be able to develop itself. So that's something that's kind of stood out to me this week as I was kind of looking a bit deeper into this stuff. So yeah, it is something like, for us, we already have students that can do these things because we've trained them to be able to, this is what a back kick looks like.
Yeah.
But the idea is, if you brought someone in brand new and you gave them this task, like anybody, like a group of yellow belts who never sparred before, if you brought them in and gave them this task, which we did this week, for example, people who just got their sparring gear, they were able to do it. Now, most of the time it was like front push kicks, it was side kicks, etc. But
Mm-hmm.
then you also have people who are a little bit, okay, thinking outside of the box. And the more you are exposed to these, and the more people that you get to try it against, the more opportunities that something else will foster as well.
And it does kind of stretch your cognitive processes as a coach. Like, okay, what scenario does this really fit in? Because we can be a little bit lazy and teach a back kick or a side kick, and without context, it's a very vacuous and empty thing. It's like, okay, well, here is a back kick, but the where, the when, and the why are missing. So if we as coaches start to think much more about where, when, and why would we really want or need a back kick, like what does back kick give you that defensive side kick doesn't? If we take that as an idea. Why do I want a back kick as opposed to something else? Is there a scoring advantage? No, it's the same points. What is it giving me? And so because of that, if we really stretch our imagination and find when is the scenario that this emerges, where is it potentially useful, then that might guide us in terms of putting together the constraint that leads us to that, and to see if it emerges as a useful and, as you said, authentic solution for some people. But famously, there are plenty of people who would never in their competitive history have thrown a back kick, and they can be just as effective. So the question is, who is it useful for? Why is it useful? What became the situation in which it was needed? And so in case people are sitting there puzzling and going, maybe start thinking about things of, well, when do you end up with your front foot crossed in front of your back foot? Very slightly on the wrong line, to where the person already has maybe got to that point where they're going to go straight through behind the back kick or behind the side kick, let's say. Or what about if you wanted to, show right and then invite the turning kick? Maybe there's things like that. Maybe you're able to gain more distance, maybe not. What about the fact that it's very hard to find a scoring target against somebody who's throwing a back kick? But there are disadvantages. So we can play with that and see if it emerges. But as you said, the hardest things for us to train in an authentic way are the ones where there's danger. So, and the back kick is one of them. It's like, sometimes if people just get it like really bang on, we're talking broken ribs. So you kind of have to be careful how you train it. And the same is true of the reverse turning or reverse hooking kick, where, if the moment is right, well, you're knocked out. Okay, so how do you train it in an authentic way? It becomes a bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, and then like what I'm thinking now next is people might be sitting down here listening to this or in the car, whatever it may be, and thinking, okay, so like if we bring it back to the start, we're talking about maybe training the back kick against the covered gloves on the belly, and we said that was decoupled.
Yeah.
And then if we go to the opposite extreme, it was just pure experiment, hoping it would emerge and hoping it would come up. So I think there's a little bit of a sweet spot there in the middle of those extremes somewhere, where we can be creative and this is the difficult part of this type of training, by the way. You must be creative as a coach prior to the session to be able to plan it, to say, okay, what tasks can I give people where this potentially will develop itself? And I think that's the tricky part of this whole thing, especially for us, because like this now type of training, ecological dynamics, constraint-led approach, etc., whatever the term you're using, is very it's taken off in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, for example.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit easier because it's a bit more structured, and there's like a structure to playing the game in jiu-jitsu, where you have to first pass the hips, and then you have to be able to get a little bit of a pin somehow, and then you have to be able to get one of their limbs or use strangulation, whatever. And there's a bit of a process to it, but I think for us the process isn't the same. It's a bit more chaotic, it's a bit more variable, and because of that, it's very difficult to be able to come up with the tasks, and to be able to then, when you do come up with the task, how is it a task that's not so broad and variable that you're not just standing there as the coach and just waiting weeks and weeks and weeks for that back kick to appear and say, yes, it happened. Because we want to be able to be involved a little bit more, to be able to coach and guide and help people. So you don't want to be just like not existent as the coach either and say, here you go, here's the problem, off you go. So like how do you come up and solve that problem, do you think?
Yeah, so I think one of the first things that does help and inform you is when you've had competition. So you have some video, you've seen people in action, you've started to find, okay, here's some problems. But even without a competition, you can watch what's emerging in your free sparring. It doesn't even have to be in the constraint, in your free sparring, and watch what's emerging. So to give an example, we knew coming in from the summer we were having people where when they want to blitz, they may have concept of the technique, but what they're looking at is, I need to get to hands. I want to do that from kicking range. But what they're actually doing is stepping forward with their front foot and putting the brakes on. So they're stepping really long into range, but then their foot's planted. So, we decided, okay, well, that's an issue we'd like to really kind of address, and how are we going to do that? And then equally, we have people who don't really have a side kick. Like, they want to throw a side kick, they think they're going to throw a side kick, but they often throw a turning kick instead, or it's something that's a hybrid, it's in between. And so we're playing with those, and so we can start to pick ideas like that and put them together and create opposed pairs. And so one of the things that we did during the week was we said, okay, well, look, one side is going to be working with attacking or defensive front leg turning kick. That's your shot. You get one shot, you have turning kick. Only one leg, keep that leg in the front, go. The other person has back fist. So we kind of created a situation where, okay, really there's going to be some play on distance. If someone kicks and drops short, lovely, you might be able to flash out that back fist. But if you want to cover the distance, okay, you can do that too. You can use a blitz style approach. And what we're not necessarily saying is, oh, make sure you don't take a big step forward with your front foot and put on the brakes, because then your opponent's going to be able to do X. What we're letting them discover is that if you do that and the brakes come on, well, your opponent only needs to lean their front head or their head back so they can kick you with their front leg, and it works. The attacking side of things with the turning kick, you can still step through that with the back fist. So there's an awful lot of real and natural dynamics that emerge within that. And you can plan all of those in advance. You can say in your head, well, we should see this, we should see this, we should see this. And then afterwards we can do the expose, and we can kind of go, well, okay, does this happen to you when you spar? We can ask those kind of questions and guide and shape it a little bit. But what we've tried to do is, as I said, follow those principles of, we want to hit and not get hit. So that's evident. It's opposed. Okay. There's a degree of representativeness to it. So it is coupled, but the representativeness is turned down because there's a lot of decisions that don't come into it. But now we have two people trying to solve problems, which lead us to two solutions as such. So we have a solution, hopefully, for the blitz, and a solution for the, if not the turning kick necessarily, we're at least learning that the turning kick isn't a great solution for to the stop and attacking technique. So how do we then use that? We kind of have to invite that attacking technique and use evasion off the line to get around it, and then be first with our front leg if we're going to get our scores. Or maybe we have the leg lifted and carried because that's harder to step through than single shots. Things like that start to emerge, and we can then build off of those. So it often starts very, very, very simple, and then you scale it. So the thing that we didn't mention today is intensity, because one of the challenges of doing something that's playful, something that's game-like, is that competition sparring is at a much higher intensity than training in the club usually. Not so much when you go to squads. So national squads, you get people who are of a similar level who can go to a higher intensity without as much risk, or they can do it in phases throughout the training sessions. Can be hard to do that in a learning environment at club. So you kind of have to accept that the intensity will be lower sometimes. But by simplifying and having two techniques that are relatively low risk like that, like the front leg turning kick and the back fist, actually you can ramp up the intensity quite a bit with verbal cueing, with space constraints, with time constraints in terms of, right, we need to have 3 back fists landed in 15 seconds, or whatever it happens to be, and we can ramp up intensity. So there can be multiple benefits to it.
Yeah, and I think that like when we do something like that one that you just did there, a lot of the time the whole idea of the constraint-led approach or ecological dynamics or whatever is that people are able to self-organize. It's like, go back to the example on the bike. It's like the whole idea is, you like, if you tell someone, okay, when the stabilizer's off, you gotta balance it in the middle and you'll be fine. That doesn't work, because the individual person has to find their balance and be able to do it for themselves. It doesn't work through speak. But I think that extreme isn't the only way we can guide people as coaches, because you could use the task you just used, and even though that would be like step one on the ladder to be able to build the skills you're looking to build, and there's more we can put into the overall game of sparring to get there, that's just step one, and we're constraining back to get there. But you can still have those examples then of saying, here's an example, have a look at this, why a turning kick might not be the best example to stop a blitz. And then you can highlight that and maybe have a aha moment through them seeing it, and then hopefully bring their attention to it, that they get to experience it again and say, yeah, that's actually true. I'm starting to notice that now, and that's not working when I want to stop them blitzing. And that can be great, but then they have to experience that as well for it to be able to have some value, I think. So like something that we've started doing in the last 2 weeks since we've come back since September as well with my advanced group is after every constraint round now, no matter what we do, while they're getting a little bit of a breather before moving on to a new partner, we're having a 35-second chat. And the point of this is just for them to chat about their experience of how it was for them. What were things that, when I was with Adrian, what were you doing good that stopped me from being able to achieve the task that I had? Or what were some problems I had? Or it was easy for me, Adrian, because I kept seeing you step in every time you kicked and I knew when you were going to kick. And I think that that's very, very valuable as well, because the chat and the realization doesn't solve the problem, but at least it opens the awareness that now I say, okay, I'm on the next round here now, and Adrian is going against a new partner, and he said, okay, Richie just said that he's seen me every time I step, so maybe I'm going to be aware of that. And then through the experience of doing it, not me telling you, but you getting to experience it because of the awareness, then hopefully you develop a little bit more and get better.
Yeah. And then, what we're hoping for ultimately is that, like for us as coaches, you don't get sick of listening to yourself on repeat. Because that, for me, from my early days in coaching is, there you go. But like from my early days coaching sparring, like so much of, no, I told you, you have to lift and carry. And you're telling people, it's like, well, if the game is experiential and if the game can teach you, you don't have to tell them because it didn't work, did it? You can ask the question, well, why do you think that didn't work? And then you can turn to the partner. Why do you think it didn't work for them? How did you know they were going to kick? And you get to that kind of experience where it's like, I'm not telling you. You're finding out for yourself. Your partners are telling you. You're discovering.
Yeah.
And then
the worst thing that could happen is the wrong answer becomes successful. But that brings me back to a point we made earlier. If the solution is truly authentic, it should be able to come up itself. And if we are correct that every time you step on your side kick, it's a bad thing because people will cut you down with the front hand, etc., if exposed to enough opportunities of this, then they should experience that. And if they don't, maybe we're wrong and that's actually not a true solution.
But let's give you this kind of simple example, and maybe we can kind of finish on this one for this week. Like, I would never train someone to or encourage someone to throw a twisting kick in sparring. But I've seen it scored.
I've seen that scores it often.
Yeah. And I've seen, like, funnily enough, it's something that's emerged quite a bit in WT. Now, I don't know if you call what they do or how they do it exactly a twisting kick. They probably have a different name for it. But when you look at, well, okay, as you said, there's an authentic solution to a problem. And if that gets you there, okay, so you're sparring right-sided against a left-sided fighter, your turning kick to the body isn't there anymore and you don't have the headshot. Maybe I'll just flick it the other way and fire it into the body. They definitely aren't expecting it, so, it might work. Is it something that we would be like intuitively as coaches with our very experienced brains, telling people to do? No, probably not. But if they find the solution and the solution works, then it was a solution.
It doesn't matter how it looks.
Yeah.
If it achieves the task consistently against a variety of opponents, it's a solid solution.
Yeah.
And like, I've actually seen this work now a lot with one of my guys in particular. It's just the way he's able to get the angle on his hips. He can get it to the head and nobody's expecting it. So am I going to tell him stop doing it? No, he's kicking people in the head, scoring 3 points. It's like, why would I tell him stop?
Yeah.
Now, is it something that we see at the top level of the game from our experience? No. But maybe that is something that we're overlooking because of this drill and this combination training that has gone over years and years and years. And that is another point of this whole system of ecological dynamics. Things are ecologically meant to develop based on how we self-organize. And I think that maybe this is a good place to finish up. That's kind of why I've been almost coming back to myself and thinking and reviewing and reflecting on how I've been doing my tasks for a while. Like, I've been training this way for many years now, but I'm starting to realize a lot of them are, and my constraints, let's say, are based on techniques, and they're ways that I want to develop. So like, one of them might be using your front hand to pin their front leg to get to the backhand, because I want to work on that backhand counter over side kick. So now, instead of like using that as a constraint and developing games around that, of one side just has the backhand, one side just has side kick, what I'm trying to start to do now, and I think it will also link into less or more decoupling. I'm confusing myself, but basically, to make the game more like the game, is actually task focused. So instead of just using that example of the side kick versus the backhand, now it's a battle for top position. And I'm not telling them about any technique they can and can't use, but I'm saying there's a battle for top position, and the top position is if we're both kicking with the front leg, any kick, if your leg is on top, you have top position. If you kick and I have my glove over your leg, I have top position. So you can get top position with your hand, or you can get top position with your foot. When you have top position, try to score any way you can. And I think that using those type of tasks are starting to be more beneficial for people, instead of saying, okay, I want people to just develop this one technique, and how can I constrain everything so much that develops? And I think that's
but I think what you're talking about there is taking a view of it where you're developing principles over tactics. So, you know, and that's the thing, that the principle should hold true whenever. It should be one of those invariants that you can kind of, okay, is it better to have the top position? Yes. It's like being better to have that kind of outside position when it comes to punching. So, you know, you want to have their front foot inside your front foot. You know, as a principle, that's going to be a more dominant position. And we arrive at things like that over time in the same way as our three controllables. So if you can control the distance between you and your opponent, if you can control your position in the ring, and if you can control the tempo of the match, how you do that isn't relevant to the principle. The principle doesn't care how you did it. But when you do those things, and the more of those things you can concurrently do, the closer you're going to get to being in a scoring position. The more you're in a scoring position, we know from the results, the more contacts you make, the more likely you are to win. So,
which brings us back to the start of the episode. Maybe they're the things that are not invariant, but maybe like just below that level of invariant. Of the things that are the overarching themes of our game that we need people to achieve. And I think that sets us up nicely potentially for next week, for us to be able to look at the most important tasks that we have in ITF sparring that we should be probably exposing people to often. And maybe that's where we'll focus on next week.
Excellent. Look forward to that one. Hopefully everyone's enjoyed that chat. If this stuff generates questions, if you don't know where to go for more info, if this is something you've never tried before, if it's something you're interested in trying, definitely reach out to us. Go into those comment sections on the YouTube video or on any of the Instagram or Facebook stuff. Does Facebook still exist? Yes, it does, just about. But, you know, definitely make a comment there so that we can kind of get onto that and follow up on your questions, and we'll deal with it in the next one.
Yeah, or else just send us a message and we can chat. If you don't want to publicly just talk about it and you're quite confused and whatever, and you're saying, geez, this stuff is mad, I don't know where to start, drop us a message, we can have a chat.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, until next Friday. Bye now.
See you then.